Lots of small-town mayors and big city bureaucrats, they love to get some national attention by declaring sanctuary cities as safe havens for people that broke the law right when they entered the country they supposedly have all of this respect for. There was an attempt to crack down on these rogue mayors that pretend that they can have law-free zones. Yes, law-free zones. Unfortunately, the whole law-free zone stands since Democrats, since Democrats have opted to block any sort of legislation which would crack down upon it. Now, my Governor Greg Abbott of the great state of Texas, who is gifted with Wendy Davis as an opponent last year when running for the position, he's had to deal with all of this nonsense on a regular basis. And he joins me now to discuss it all. Governor Abbott, always so good to see you. Thank you for being with me today. And I have to tell you, I was reading your letter to Lupe Valdez, the sheriff who has basically decided to have his own little case-by-case situation, sanctuary city situation here in Texas. This was a very stern letter that you sent. Tell us about this.
Well, the letter is stern because the issue is very serious. We all remember what happened to Kate Steinle in San Francisco, where a sheriff in the San Francisco area refused to enforce the ICE detainer provisions. And that's exactly what the Dallas County Sheriff articulated that she was going to do, that she was no longer going to strictly follow the ICE detainer request, which means that she was going to be providing sanctuary to those who were here illegally, potentially releasing onto the streets those who would commit even further crimes to people in this state. And I'm saying no more. We are not going to have sanctuary cities in the state of Texas. And in my letter, I outline ways in which Texas is going to crack down on sanctuary cities.
Right. Well, and with this, too, I mean, these policies that we have seen implemented in cities like San Francisco and obviously in states like Texas, I mean, it seems to be that it's like a trend. There are more and more local officials, if they're not sheriffs, then they're mayors, like in San Francisco, that seem to think that just avoiding an ICE detainer and throwing federal policy and federal law out of the window, that's acceptable, and that they continue on like this, Governor, with no repercussions. And a lot of states, when they attempt to move, as we've seen in situations like Arizona, the federal government then comes down on those lawmakers.
Well, oddly enough, even the federal government is saying through the ICE director that the ICE director is expecting local law enforcement officials to follow the ICE detainer rules. And the ICE director said one of the leading causes of this criminal action is because local officials are not following the ICE detainer rules. And so we are going to ensure that Texas is a rule of law state.
What does this do to the crime rate in these cities? I mean, I've seen a number of different studies and I've seen some statistics thrown around, but I mean, in reality, what does this do to the crime rate when you have people who enter the country illegally and then they're harbored and they're protected by the very people who are supposed to protect and serve the citizens of the United States, and they keep, in many cases, violent felons running free within the boundaries of these sanctuary cities? What are we seeing in terms of criminal statistics on this?
Well, I mean, you are articulating one of the reasons why we're trying to crack down on sanctuary cities, and that is because when you don't enforce the rule of law, it attracts more lawbreakers, which is exactly what happened this last week in the Rio Grande Valley, where we saw an outbreak of those who were affiliated with the drug cartels in Mexico, who were committing crimes in the Rio Grande Valley. And they're doing it because they believe that the laws are not going to be enforced in this state. And we're sending a very loud and clear message. They are going to be enforced. Lawbreakers are not going to be tolerated.
What's going to happen to Sheriff Valdez if she doesn't want to uphold this law, if she doesn't want to respect the ICE detainers, and if she doesn't take your warning seriously?
We are seeking to do several things. One is to have an outright law preventing sheriffs from not following the ICE detainer rules. But in case they do go ahead and violate that new Texas law that I'm proposing additional sanctions, such as looking at the ways in which we can impose the cost made by local cost of decisions made by local decision makers on the local community. Instead of the state of Texas having to pick up the cost incurred by the sanctuary city policies, make the locals pick it up, and that will make sure the locals hold their elected officials accountable. But the second thing is we have in the state of Texas these sovereign immunity laws that put a cap on the amount that a city or county may have to pay in damages because someone does some illegal action. I'm proposing that those caps be lifted on cities or counties or political subdivisions that refuse to apply these laws. That could subject them to millions of dollars in potential civil liability. And so we're sending a loud message that there's a price to be paid if you do not follow the law in the state of Texas.
As I mentioned earlier, whenever you've seen previous governors of border states attempt to do anything to not only protect the border but also protect their citizens, there's swift action from the DOJ. Are you anticipating any sort of federal fight?
You know, I'm not for this reason, Dana, and that is if you go back to that Arizona case, we joined in with Arizona in support of their efforts to try to get control of what was going on in their own state. The one part of that Supreme Court decision that came out in favor of Arizona, in favor of the states, was the fact that the states do have the authority to enforce the law in their states. And so we are clearly acting within the confines of what the United States Supreme Court has already allowed the states to do.
How disappointed were you, and I imagine that it was greatly disappointed, to see Senate Democrats completely thwart this legislation that would specifically target sanctuary cities and these elected officials that are really breaking the law?
You know, Dana, to be honest, we have grown accustomed to Washington, D.C. Being impotent, being able to act to protect the states. We've been pleading and pleading and pleading for years, if not decades now, that the federal government step up and secure the border, prevent sanctuary cities and things along those lines, and repeatedly they have failed to take the action that was needed. And so we were hopeful but not surprised at their inability to pass a law.
Right. What amazes me is, you know, this going back to this Dallas County policy change, whenever they say, well, you know, it's a lot of immigration advocates, you know, they've criticized it by saying, well, these are just immigrants who've committed low-level offenses. But isn't the first offense, Governor, the act of immigrating, entering illegally, which I would not really classify as a low-level offense?
Well, first, Dana, it's so important to understand that a low-level offense to one person may be different than to another person. And why was it this person was let out of jail in San Francisco? I mean, they could have committed other serious crimes and then be arrested for jaywalking or something like that. These people need to be detained, allow ICE to thoroughly investigate their background, find out what they're doing, and then take the appropriate action to process them through the criminal prosecution process. We have to be a nation that is a rule of law nation, not a nation where laws are repeatedly broken and those broken laws are awarded. And we're not going to tolerate that in the state of Texas.
What's your best estimate on the number of sanctuary cities just in the state of Texas alone?
Good question, and that's one thing we're trying to dig into, Dan, and that's because as far as, quote, written policies, I doubt there are any written policies. However, there probably are many unwritten policies, and so what we want to do is we're just going to pass a law that ensures that sanctuary cities are outlawed in the state of Texas with real teeth and consequences for failing to comply with that new law.
Yeah, well, Governor Greg Abbott, the state of Texas, which, by the way, Governor, very, very happy with the open carry law that's passed. I have to high-five you through the television screen, through the monitor here. Very, very pleased about that. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Dana.
Governor Greg Abbott, the great state of Texas. Senator Rand Paul has announced